welcome to Moves That Matter with Dr. Clyde Posley. I am your host, Dr. Clyde Posley, and we are excited to have you tune in with us again. We thank God for the Moves That Matters show, the broadcast that you, of course, can subscribe to on iTunes, on YouTube, on Facebook Live, and also on my website, drclydeposley.com. We have a fun-filled but very serious show for you today in our African American month, our Black History Month series of shows. We're looking forward to informing you, inspiring you, but at the same time, we're also trying to make sure that you are aware that we care about what's going on in the African American community. We want to focus on that this month, and we ask you to tune in each month. We have a star-studded lineup each week coming to you every Tuesday at 7:30. I want to remind you, just before we get into the first segment of this two-part segment to this show, about my book, More Than Icons and Images, Uncovering the Hidden Protest Narrative of the Black Athlete in the 21st Century. That book is available to you on drclydeposley.com, on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, and wherever books are sold. We thank you, those of you who've already purchased the book. We appreciate your efforts to participate in our attempts to disseminate information about the African-American male struggle in the U.S. that's going on today. We have a star-studded guest, what I consider to be a star-studded guest lineup today. We have, later in our broadcast, we're going to have Miss Nadia Miller, president of Pink Forever, and also Miss Lisa Hayes, the executive director of the Red Alliance, ridding trying to destroy this disparity between cancer treatment and the early detection for African American women in the African American culture. So those two ladies are going to come in the second part of our broadcast and talk a bit about that today. But right now, I have with me Miss CAMISHE NUNLEY, and she is going to talk. We're going to get into a discussion about the role and the importance of mental health among African American male leaders around the world, in America, in our city. And this is a major subject. I invited her here because she's doing a great work around the country, in the Midwest. And so just a segue into my conversation with her, the Bible talks about mental health, and it points out that mental health and leadership do have a symbiogy, do have an intersection. In the book of 1 Kings, chapter 19, Elijah, the prophet, after his bout with Jezebel, had a strong, profound bout with depression, so much so that the Bible says that Elijah asked God to take his life, meaning suggesting that he had a moment where he was suicidal. And so he did not commit suicide, as we know, but he had a moment in his life. That does not define who he was, but he had a moment in his life where his mental health was weighing more on him than his spiritual well-being. We're going to talk about that a little bit going forward. But first of all, let me welcome our guest, Miss CAMISHE NUNLEY. Hello, Miss Nunley.
Thank you. Hello.
How are you today?
Good. I'm doing well.
Good. Glad to have you. Miss Nunley, tell us a little bit about what you do with mental health, just overall, and some of your work in focus relative to African American males or males in general.
Absolutely.
With mental health
Sure.
and leadership.
So like you said, I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I have my own private practice. It's now a group private practice called Healing Your Hidden Hurts Counseling Agency. And over the last 3.5 years or so, we have built into that practice a spiritual component where we now have a mental health ministry, and that allows us to travel throughout Indiana and some other churches to provide mental health counseling services to congregants. And moreover, my specialty is working with leaders in the church and pastors and what have you. And so I felt really compelled to do that ever since God put it on my heart and showed me the level of suffering that is happening at that level.
That is fantastic. Well, Ms. Nunley, we're going to take a break just for a second, and when we come back, we're going to get a little further into this discussion. I can't wait to have it. We'll be right back here on Moves That Matter. All right, we're back here on Moves That Matters. I am your host, Dr. Clyde Posley, here with my guest, Miss CAMISHE Nunley from Healing Your Hidden Hurts. And so we're going to get into our discussion here. We're going to talk, and you guys need to tune in, lean forward, because we're going to go there. This is very important. And what the work that Ms. Nunley is doing is a work that I believe many African-American leaders, whether pastors, politicians, chaplains,
Yes.
whatever, fathers, whatever role you might find yourself in as an African-American male, your mental health is important. So, Ms. Nunley, tell us what kind of pressures do you see African-American males in leadership being confronted by?
Well, again, Dr. Posley, thank you so much for letting me come and talk about such a nuanced topic that a lot of times do not get enough attention, especially in our communities today. In terms of the pressures that I see currently going on within the climate of pastors and leaders or what have you, is this ideal of suffering in silence, where a lot of pastors, leaders feel like they have to go through these things and go through them alone. Because they have to model this ideal around strength.
Right.
And with that, they don't understand that within strength lies your ability to self-control and have emotions and have them freely. And strength, the undergirth of strength is your ability and your willingness to be transparent. And so when you're not, it leads to all type of toppling issues, such as depression, anxiety, frustrations, anger, irritability, what we in the field know as compassion fatigue, where you just kind of burn out. And most of all, it could lead
Compassion fatigue.
Yes. And most of all, it could lead to traumatic reactions if you allow it to go long enough. And that's something that I specialize in is post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I've seen a lot of pastors come through who have that diagnosis as a result of just taking everything in and not having any outlets.
Right. Let me ask you, so what type of pressures weigh most on pastors who you, not necessarily ones that you treat, but just in your field? What have you seen? What type of pressures and where do they come from?
I think all in all, it's the backing of that platform. And so with that platform, with that level of promotion comes intense conflict. Conflict from your congregations, conflict from your board, conflict from your family.
Right.
So some of the things that I've seen
And
mostly.
your own personal confrontation with your own personal
Right,
aspirations.
Right. So some of the things that I've seen is where people expect you to be God. And so any fallacy in that, they can and will sometimes turn in on you and project all of their inner hurts
when you
and
don't, when you prove
insecurities
that you're not God.
when you disappoint them.
Right.
And so that's the biggest one that I've seen in terms of pressure. But all in all, just a lot of people think that because you have that platform, you're not supposed to have an internal struggle. And honestly, you're only the shepherd. You're still human. And so you still suffer with human conditions as a result. And a part of the human condition comes with pain.
Right.
If you don't experience pain, then you're not human. And so to expect our pastors and our leaders not to have some level of pain and suffering or not to be perfect in every areas of our lives, it just sets not only the congregation up for failure, but the pastor or leader themselves.
Right. There is a part of my doctoral work had to do was centered on Jacques Lacan, and one interpreter of Jacques Lacan was an author named Mark Brocker, and he talked about in one of his writings that part of he talked about grand narratives, master narratives, and part of what religion becomes for a lot of people is a progenitor of this grand narrative that all religious leaders are perfect because they think religion is perfect.
Right.
And when they discover both, or untrue. Neither religion is perfect nor the leaders. There's then a turning on the church for, in a sense, misleading them. You know,
We call that church hurt.
church hurt.
Right?
That's just
Well,
a
and a lot
fancy
of
way of
times-
saying
A lot of
that's
times
right.
it's people hurt.
It's people hurt.
And they bring their own subjective experiences of
Right.
reality into the church. And when, like you said, when it's projected onto the pastor and they don't meet that expectation, then they walk away and say that church hurt me.
That's right. So how serious, meaning how widespread a problem is this, is the mental health or the disparities among understanding mental health in African American leadership, among African American leaders?
I mean, it's a fairly serious issue. We are losing pastors and leaders at an alarming rate. I just recently posted on my Facebook group page about a pastor recently taking his life as a result of the pressures that were placed upon him as a result of the church, as well as some personal issues, family issues that he was going through, and just didn't see any other avenue. So it is fairly serious, and it has to be, because when you're expected to be perfect and you're expected not to have emotional reactions or not to have any level of pain or suffering, what you start to do is start to believe that narrative of sorts. And you start to try to deny your emotional self.
Right.
And you start to feel as though if you can just deaden yourself to the emotions or the reactions that you feel, then you'll be better. But what that leads to is self-deception. And if you continue in that for too long, like I said, post-traumatic stress disorder is a huge likelihood, but you also go into secondary traumatic symptoms.
Let's talk a little bit about that.
So secondary trauma is basically you're taking everything in and you're experiencing certain symptomology as a result of not having a way to get it out.
So you have the post-traumatic
right.
distress disorder, and
so
then the next step.
it's coupled.
Okay,
So
okay.
usually it starts with secondary trauma
Okay.
or compassion fatigue.
Okay.
And then if it's allowed to go long enough, it turns into chronic post-traumatic stress disorder. So secondary trauma, things like having nightmares, flashbacks, intrusive thoughts about your expectations, increased irritability, frustrations. Some people turn to self-harm. Some people become illusional, not delusional, but they start to create illusions of reality. And so it really is hard. Depersonalization, I don't know if you've ever heard of that, where a lot of times you feel like you're a casing of yourself. You don't feel like you're within your body, so it almost feels like you're outside of your body. Numbing reactions happen where you, like I said, don't experience any level of emotion. You feel like you have to numb yourself to that emotion.
Right.
And sometimes suicidality or mood disorders become a part of that as well. So.
Right.
Yeah, so it's really serious, and that's why I encourage all leaders, all pastors to have a support system in place. And if you find yourself venturing into this level of mental health, being willing to reach out to a counselor, it's not going to hurt anyone to talk.
Right.
It's not going to hurt anybody to
That
talk.
brings me to my next question, and you kind of stepped into it already, Ms. Nunley. Why it's so difficult, or why so many pastors, politicians, black males in leadership, why they suffer in silence?
Yes.
Because in many instances they're supposed to be the black stallion in the sense of just strong
Display
and
strength.
just display strength, and so it's easy to just, out of embarrassment or anger, it would seem, at yourself or at the people who are causing it, to be in silence. Do you run across silent sufferers
Oh, absolutely. There's such a level of guilt and shame that
which are
I've
all
found.
together?
Yeah, that creates itself as a result of feeling like you have to keep everything in, and you have to exemplify this ideal of strength. And a lot of times people don't understand, like I said earlier, strength is a relative word, and you have to understand that vulnerability is the gateway to strength. And so in order to...
Say that again, if you don't mind.
Vulnerability is the gateway to strength.
Opening
letting
up.
your hair down,
Yeah.
allowing your scars to be seen so that other people can then share their scars with you. That's the gateway to strength.
right.
So if you're walking around denying that part of you, then that's like 50% of you that is not being adhered to.
Right.
And if we're talking about being emotionally whole, we have to be a well-rounded person. So I can be gifted and anointed spiritually. I can be great character-wise and have my ducks in a row physically, but I also have to have the capacity to be willing to be strengthened emotionally and psychologically.
That is so, that's what you were saying. It is just so powerful. Churches, I'm speaking about black pastors now. Churches need this type of counseling before they call a pastor.
Yes.
Or before they function with their pastor. All churches should go through this type of training. I was talking to a pastor, and he was telling me about, how dangerous it can be for churches. And he was depicting church members as sheep, as the Bible does.
Yes.
Sheep trying to select a pastor. I mean, what is the? I'm going to get into another thing with that, but how is that really possible for the sheep to know what they need in their shepherd collectively? They're going to select selfishly. Here's what I want. And here's why this is important. A church congregation is the bride of sorts to a pastor, his spiritual bride in a sense. And so she is a helpmeet. She has got to know his vulnerabilities without judging him. She's got to be aware of where he's at risk.
Right.
What his needs are, what his background is that make him, to some degree, vulnerable to certain things.
What his character is.
What his character is, without judging him, if she's going to love him.
Yes.
Because you cannot fully love that which you don't know.
Absolutely.
And so I think what you're saying is just so powerful, but it's not just for the black leaders, because we can't talk about black leaders often without talking about the need to shape up and strengthen their help.
Right.
That's very important.
I thought it was really unique in the Bible how it talks about the women would always go and prepare a place for them, for him, when he would go to speak. And to me, that says that they had to make it so that when he entered, the love was almost there, right?
Prepare
of course,
the place.
he's all love, but when he goes, he's in a place of familiarity. And so I think the same is very true for pastors. Like, no one is going to be that ideal pastor. I
Not on this earth.
No, nobody's going to be that idea. And so if you're closed off to love, unconditional love, which is basically what you were talking about, being willing to accept a pastor wholeheartedly, regardless of if they have minor issues in their life. To be able to have that sense of unconditional love, we have to know what role our psychological and mental health play in your ability to do that.
Permanent
because
role.
Otherwise you're just going off of your subjective experience of what love is, and that makes it easier for you then to condemn a pastor that you yourself brought in and castrate him from the church as a result of him disappointing you.
That's powerful.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And so I would just say, looking at things, and I did a training on this about creating an emotionally healthy church, looking at things through the lens and through the heart of God, and learning that, yes, we can all put together a search committee and look for any one pastor, but we also have to be willing to build that pastor up. It's like a lot of congregations want a move-in ready home. But they don't have move-in ready budgets.
That's right.
Right?
Or mindsets. That's right.
So we have to be willing to meet him where he's at so that he can build. Because, the Bible talks about how we are not made to be alone. And so if somebody feels like they're walking in solitude and they have this weight that they're carrying with them in terms of building the church, getting members, all of these things, as well as, family issues or personal issues and their own aspirations, then they're going to crumble under the pressure.
Right.
It's inevitable.
That is, you are saying some powerful stuff. Man, that is all. Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. And on my next show, I have a pastor, Dr. Thurn Williams. We might even get into a little bit of this, but I want to ask you, what are 3 things that a pastor can do to bolster or strengthen or invite God in to his mental health, healing and wholeness?
So the first thing is going to sound kind of off-putting, but honestly, my thought is, just as I've done this work over the years, is we have to surrender to self. We have to literally die to self
Powerful.
in order to protect the anointing that God has put on our lives. And we have to walk in humility with a theology of weakness instead of a theology of power.
Say that again.
So
Walk in humility.
with a theology of weakness, which is what Paul talks about when he was condemning people about being super apostles. And walk more so in, and not walk so much in theology of power, which is basically walking in pride and walking with that legalism stuff, carrying around, you have to do this right, you have to do, the law is prevalent, but it's only prevalent insofar as to reveal to us how we're in sin. It's not meant to condemn us or shut us down or even save us. And so we have to move away from this ideal of power and control and even pushing our own agendas in the church, which is what a theology of power is as well, and be willing to accept and boast in our weakness.
I think any pastor listening today, it could benefit greatly. I know that you have some other ventures that you are interested in getting involved in, other avenues to try to help pastors. Just talk a little bit about those.
So it's really interesting that you started off the show with a story about Elijah, because that's what led me into my newest venture, where I've started a pastor support group called First Shepherds. I was going to call it First Kings, but then I realized there's women pastors as well. Not realized, but I knew that. And so just showing how, when you walk in this, I think one of the biggest things with Elijah is he felt alone. He even said, I'm the only one left. And so while it was depression, it was also coupled with a level of fear and anxiety of the spirit of Jezebel coming down on him and not feeling emboldened to be able to speak up. And to me, First Shepherds is about teaching pastors and leaders how to step up even when they're the only one. I've always been the only one, but I've been willing to be resilient enough, empowered enough to speak up against what I know not to be gospel, what I know not to be in truth. And so that's one of our newest ventures that we're going into right now. And then we also have our bullying program that we do every year. We're contracted, or we're partnered with the WNBA. That's coming up here in May. And so we're really preparing for that, because just like our pastors and leaders are under attack, so are our children, which is my second ministry.
Right. You are doing a great work. You're really doing a great work. I wish I had 2 hours. I might need to have a series of just because it's mental health and wholeness and hidden hurts. All of that intersectionality is really causing a whole lot of things that happen in the church today, and we don't even realize that it's coming from some of those things. So, listen, I'd like you to take maybe a couple minutes and just give us some closing thoughts about what you'd like to see happen within the body of Christ, in society, or wherever there are Black leaders who are seeking wholeness with their mental health.
I guess one closing thought for me is just to all the leaders and pastors and any person in the congregation who feels led by God is to be able to stick with it and not to give up on the fight, because we are all up under some sort of spiritual warfare, and to be willing to step out on faith and let somebody help you. The Bible talks about we shall be transformed by the renewing of our mind. And counseling is a light act that helps you to understand where the dark areas are so that your minds can be renewed. And I just encourage all of you to stick with the fight, move through it, and be willing to speak out and seek help if you need it.
God bless you, CAMISHE. God bless you. We thank you so much for being here today. We're going to be right back in just a moment with our next guest. We thank God for CAMISHE NUNLEY and the Healing Hurts Ministry. Her information is available to you. Should be on the screen there, but just below. And so we'll be right back in just a moment on Moves That Matters. I'm Dr. Clyde Posley. Welcome back to Moves That Matter. I am your host, Dr. Clyde Posley, and I have with me my guest, Nadia Miller, and Lisa Hayes. I promised you we would be discussing health issues in the African American community in this show. If you're just tuning in, our last guest, Ms. CAMISHE Nunley, Healing Your Hidden Hurts, was here. She informed us greatly and blessed us. We have with us today two trailblazers in our month of African American Voices, New Strides, New Voices and New Strides. We have with us Ms. NADIA Miller and Lisa Hayes, and they're going to talk to us about their fight, our fight, you'll find out, to rid the Midwest, Indiana, Indianapolis, but the country of this evil that we know of called cancer. And we can do it. God is a powerful God. If he can heal one, he can heal us all. Amen? Right. Ms. Miller, talk to us about Pink Forever and your role in it coming to be.
Well, I am the president and the co-founder of Pink Forever. And Pink Forever was created actually by my brother. He founded the organization back in 2005 after our sister had died of the disease. And then 2 years later, I was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Right.
And so Pink Forever is an education and outreach organization here in Indianapolis. And our focus is to provide education and materials to individuals who are in active treatment for breast cancer. And then also we have an emergency assistance fund to provide services like those forgotten needs, prescriptions, gas money, daycare for the babies to get back and forth, things that are kind of forgotten about. And then we provide mammography for individuals who are underserved and underinsured here in Indianapolis.
Servicing the needs of those people. Ms. Hayes, talk to us about the Red Alliance.
Yes, so the Red Alliance, RED stands for Reaching to End Disparities.
Right.
And this was an organization that was formed several years ago specifically to look at eliminating the breast cancer disparities that African American women face in Indianapolis. Those disparities include having a higher mortality rate than in comparison to white women. Also, we tend to be diagnosed at a later stage of the disease, which means it makes it harder to
African-American women do.
African-American women, correct. And then also, we are diagnosed at a younger age in comparison to white women.
I just saw some research I put on Facebook about African-American women being diagnosed at an earlier age more often than not.
Exactly.
With breast
And
cancer.
also another one is being diagnosed with more aggressive forms of breast cancer, one of which is triple-negative breast cancer, which Nadia and I both were
See,
diagnosed
that's
with
information
and
that people
survived.
need to know. That's why this show is important. You as guests is important. People need to understand this is not just, found you heard so-and-so had breast cancer. So this is a big deal. It touches us all. 2.5 years ago, as you both know, I lost my sister to the battle of breast cancer. First of the 5 children to go home to be with the Lord. It devastated my family, and it was a long process. She fought it, but ultimately she succumbed to the disease. So talk to us about what we can do about it. How does Pink Forever and the Red Alliance work together? And be specific, if you will, about ridding the country of the African-American community, this dilemma in our community.
I'll start out with that. And I do want to mention to your listeners that Pastor Posley is the newly elected president of the board of the Red Alliance.
Graciously,
so I'm really happy that he's
you.
on board in that position because you have been very supportive of the Red Alliance.
Thank you very much.
The Red Alliance was really formed with the thought that bringing together various stakeholders in the healthcare environment. And stakeholders include caregivers and survivors, as well as those hospital systems and insurance companies, but to bring together all those stakeholders who have some role in providing any kind of services as it relates to breast cancer. And so one of the things that makes the Red Alliance stand apart from some other organizations is we are truly trying to work with all these various partners to look at why is that those disparities happening.
Right, locating the gaps.
Finding out why, and then
Right.
from that, coming up with solutions. And we know that not just one person or one organization can do that. That's why we try to gather partners to help us with this fight to eliminate disparities. And so Pink Forever is one of our biggest and most important partners.
Right.
Pink Forever has a similar mission in that Pink Forever is concerned about disparities and has
Talk
a
to us a
role
little bit
of
about that.
educating and bringing awareness to the disease. So they're like the feet on the ground.
Okay.
For the Red Alliance, because we might identify what some of the problems are, what some of the needs are, but our organization doesn't have the backing behind it to actually provide the service. So that's where we turn to
And
partners
that's where Pink
like
Forever
Pink Forever.
comes in. Talk to us a little bit about that, Ms. Miller.
Well, Pink Forever, one of the things about Pink Forever, in my opinion, and one thing we found out in the community is that for the African American community, it's important that there is a trust factor. So
Right.
we provide individuals that look like me and you to go out and talk to families and
build relationships.
It's important. I mean, the
Right.
rapport is what initially matters, to provide that connection so you can even serve, within the community.
Right.
And very often, because the disparity is so large between African American women and Caucasian women, that it matters and it requires us to provide individuals and information that has faces on it that look like yours and mine, that also provide the same type of cultural dialogue that's important so that we can reach and we can service those. And so we provide volunteers and educators that can go into the community. And some areas where folks just don't want to go into, and give them the information that they need.
That's right.
I want to pick up on what Nadia said about that trust factor, but because with the Red Alliance, one of the things that we intentionally did was to build a faith-based component into what we do, because research shows, and I think all of us who are involved in churches in the faith-based community, we know that the church is where Black women find comfort,
Right.
safety,
Right.
and trust. And so if we're trying to spread messages of awareness and education and to dispel myths and to help people to overcome what kind of fears they have, the church is one of the best places
Absolutely.
to do that.
Absolutely.
And so the Red Alliance has a faith-based component, which is, again, another part of the partnership that we have with Pink Forever, because Pink Forever has been working within churches for, I
About
guess, since
10 years.
That's
its
right.
inception.
That's right.
And so, particularly in 2019, we are joining forces together
Right.
to make sure that we're trying to touch as many churches in the Indianapolis area as we
Absolutely.
can. So,
I'm-
so one of the
I'm going
things
to do
that-
everything within my power to make sure that happens.
that's why we're so happy
Absolutely.
to have you on board. And
Absolutely.
so we have, one of the main things that the Red Alliance does is train breast health advocates to serve in their churches. So they can be that helper there to implement programs, to connect people with resources if they need breast health services, to
Right.
be a support system for those who might be going through the diagnosis stage or getting treatment. And then again, once they're there, they need to be connected to help.
Right.
That help comes from organizations like Pink Forever.
You know, that all of this is very valuable information, and especially from two survivors,
Right.
two people who have seen the underbelly of the painful process that breast cancer can bring into the life of intrude
Yes.
into the life of a young woman. So listen, so talk to us a little bit about why it is so important to be proactive versus just reactive after this thing occurs. Why is preventative maintenance and awareness so important? Nadia?
Preventative maintenance actually saves lives. We can't do anything, and this is the truth, about being diagnosed. But you can get ahead of the game by having annual screenings, by being aware of your body, by understanding what is going on, to be proactive enough to go to the doctor.
Let me just break in here. I want to ask you a question. Can you talk, and I noticed, why aren't more women, African American community, getting treatment, taking these proactive steps? I mean, you're the research arm of this partnership,
Right.
Red Alliance. What's getting in the way of the screenings, the mammographies, and all of that?
Yeah, I like to address that because the unique thing about Indianapolis is that this disparity exists where Black women are dying more often from breast cancer, despite the fact that we're being screened
Right.
at about the same rate as white women. So what that says to us and what researchers are looking at is that there is something happening from
Right.
that time of that screening on through to possibly diagnosis and treatment. So that's where a lot
What
of
is that?
our research is focuses on. So one of the things that we found so far is that a woman may go in for a screening, a Black woman may go in for her screening and get an abnormal result. When they get that abnormal result, several things could happen. One is that fear comes in, and that fear may paralyze them. And so what that means is I get an abnormal result, I'm not going to do anything, or I'm just going to go to church and pray, which is prayer is always good, but there's
But
work
it's
to
not
do.
all that we need to do.
Exactly. Exactly.
'Cause the
So
Bible teaches us that faith without works is
Is
dead,
dead.
being alone.
yes, yes, and so that's a message that can be reinforced in the church.
Yeah.
So again, that's why we partner. But so that can happen. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's not knowing where to go.
Right.
That, I need to go back for more tests. I don't have insurance, or if I have insurance, I'm going to have to pay a copay. I can't afford that. Well, the Red Alliance, something else that we do is make sure that women are connected with resources so that they know there are resources out there, such as
I was
Pink
about
Forever.
to say, which brings me
Well,
back
you could go to your- for
Pink
your
Forever
screening.
for the service. And let me ask you this: what have you, Ms. Miller? What have you, or have you heard from as you give services, and oftentimes in services to end-time patients? What regrets do you hear about what they wish they would have done about early detection, if any?
I think the main one is what Lisa just spoke about, is I wish that I wasn't scared to go. I wish I wasn't scared to follow up or follow through. It matters. Timing matters. It matters from the time that you get a letter and says that you need to come back in for additional screening. It matters. And when at the end of or the quality of life is what we always talk about. I mean, at that particular juncture, there's not much we can do at that point in time with regrets. And so for me, and I think for all the breast health advocates here in Indianapolis, my biggest thing and a call to action that we want to for the Indianapolis community is to encourage, from faith-based programs to programs in the community, encourage individuals to be proactive, to go after your own health care, and also to be your own advocate while you're in the doctor's office.
Exactly.
Right?
That's
If you don't advocate for you, who will?
Start to fight for your
Right.
life in conversation with your doctor.
Absolutely.
Exactly. That's a
Absolutely.
real key, too, because some of the research that we've done also is showing that sometimes these more adverse outcomes that Black women face is because of a lack of good communication between them and their treatment team.
Or knowing how to talk to them.
Knowing how to talk, or knowing
What's the
or
verbiage?
understanding
Right.
what they're saying. So, and it's not just Black women, Black men too, and really
When I say knowing
across
how
the
to talk,
community.
I mean understanding the vocabulary. When people talk about T-cell counts, or when they talk about what leukocytes are and what we're trying to accomplish with chemo.
Right.
That's
Being
what I
able
mean by
to
knowing
say,
knowing the verbiage.
break this down. Help me to understand.
Sure.
Talk to me in a language I understand. And if your healthcare provider is not willing to do that, you need to find another
Get
one.
You
another-
have options.
And you
That's
have
right.
options.
Absolutely.
That's the other
You have
important thing to
options.
know is you have options.
That's right.
You have treatment options. The other thing I want to mention about being proactive is that people need to know their personal risks for breast cancer or any
That
any
brings me
kind
to
of
my next
disease.
question. So, what are some of the risks? What are some of the factors, symptoms? If a person if a young African American woman or an African American woman of any age has, what signs might she know? I mean, I think some people know the universal signs of the feeling for a lump, but what other signs may be potential indicators that you need to go get a mammogram?
And I'll veer to Lisa for this as well, but I mean, we both, number one, everyone, in my opinion, be it female or male, has to start with, you have to know what is normal for your own body.
Exactly.
Did you say female or male?
Female or male.
Talk about that a little bit.
Female or male.
Because people need to hear this.
Well, I think it's a misnomer that men don't get breast cancer, that are not impacted by breast cancer. But I believe in 2015, 2016, there were 1,890 some men that were diagnosed with breast cancer.
Right.
That's a large number, considering most would believe
and
that
many of them young men.
young men.
Yes.
And the numbers for young women, and I say young, under the age of 30 or under the age of 40 being diagnosed with breast cancer is over 200,000 or so with just that number. That's a pretty large number.
Yes, it is.
And I think that when we talk about breast cancer and breast health, or individuals see images on the screen, they forget that those disparaging numbers represent people of color.
Right.
And that is, and also thank you, just as a side note, giving us the platform to discuss this.
Absolutely.
Because
So-
it is
so
something that
necessary.
it does, and it goes unnoticed at times.
Right.
Until the services are needed, unfortunately, for services, burial services, or someone is succumbing to
Right.
the disease before
Right.
they reach out to get the
Right.
services.
We need to get ahead of this thing.
Right. I
Yeah.
wanted to speak to that as well because you talked about knowing some of the signs and symptoms, but I think it's important to, even before you get to
Signs and symptoms.
Signs
right.
and symptoms. There are things that people ought to be doing.
Yeah.
For instance,
Diet.
Yes. And Nadia was mentioning though about just knowing your body. And this goes for breast cancer and all other diseases. If you know what's normal for you, once you feel or see something that just doesn't seem right, even if you're just feeling, I just don't feel right. That's your body talking to you. Something is going on. That's your trigger. Go get it checked out.
Right.
Don't just say, well, I'm going to ignore this because, again, it could be fear, or I'm going to just let this ride because I don't want to spend the money.
Yeah.
No, find some resources, whatever you need.
Right.
But then also
Just procrastination.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right.
Know what I
But,
should, just don't get around to doing it.
yeah, just all these other things, life happens, all these other things that you put as a priority, but you got to make your health your priority
Right.
sometimes,
That's
but
right.
but then beyond that, just healthy lifestyles. You mentioned diet.
Right.
And nobody really wants to talk about food and
Right.
eating healthy, but it does have an impact on
Sure.
your risk.
There are
for it.
vegetables that fight carcinogens.
Exactly.
You know, absolutely. A healthy diet, rest,
Yeah.
plenty of rest.
That's a
you
good
know,
one.
avoiding
Stress.
stress.
Exercise.
Right. Drug use. We don't want to, bring
We don't
these
wanna
things
talk
in.
about that.
Right. These things into our, that is so. So talk a little bit about as we prepare, as we kind of round up our closing here. What kind of informational summits do you have moving forward to get the word out?
Great time to ask because we have coming up on March 8th and 9th our third annual Red Alliance Breast Health Summit. And this summit was actually an idea that was born by Nadia and I. And 4 years ago?
4 years ago.
Just looking at the community and feeling this need to, share information and share it in a way that was compelling to our people, to get them all in the same room, to just kind of talk, to share information, to get people connected to resources.
Right.
So that's what we do. So coming up on March 8th and 9th, our Breast Health Summit, it will be at the Marriott East out on 21st and Shadeland.
Right.
Full day of educational information. We're going to have a panel discussion where Dr. Posley, along with some other
will be there.
stakeholders, will be there. Andrea Moorhead, Channel 13 anchor, who recently had her own breast cancer experience, will be facilitating, moderating that panel where we're going to be talking about what role do different organizations, businesses, hospitals, what role do you
The
have?
village it takes
Yes,
to do this.
to address these disparities and have some better patient outcomes. Because
Yes.
that's really what it's
That's
about.
what it's about. It's the end game.
Exactly.
It's the end game. It's
so-
a teleological
Yeah.
pursuit. It's the result. We want results. We want people healed, and,
Right.
and the quality of life strengthened and prolonged for people. Let me say this: you two ladies are a gift to this community. Not long ago on this very show, I taught a lesson about Peter and John, the first miracle in the church of two Christians got together was when they, in Acts chapter 3, and that man had been laid at the gate just outside of the healing that needed to go on, that was going to go on inside. Peter told that man, "Silver and gold have we none, but look on us." I think you two could send that very message to people, and you're going to do it through this broadcast. Look on us. Here are two women who have used the services of which we speak, and also by the grace of God, you're alive to show that what you do helps people live. I'm proud of both of you. I'm glad to
thank
know you,
you.
and thanks for coming.
Thank
God bless
you.
both of you.
Thank
God
you.
bless
Thank
for
you very
being here.
much.
That's our show for today. This has been Moves That Matters with Dr. Clyde Posley. We have a star-studded lineup coming to you next week. I hope you continue to tune in. I thank you for all of the views I'm getting from across the country, across the world, Germany, Switzerland. God bless you all. Thank you for your participation and engagement with our show. Listen, you're going to be making some moves, some decisions every day in your life. Choose to make your moves that matter. God bless you.